So today I want to share some of my observations of Diablo 4 and kind of what I expected going into the game and what I've learned as approaching level 100. You can see I'm level 94 at this point, and the game really isn't what I initially expected to some degree. And the first thing I want to talk about is this poll I put out just the other day, which is, what level have you reached in Diablo 4? And you might notice that a large majority are under that 75 point. And that honestly is probably not even the halfway point, or potentially around the halfway point as you reach level 75 all the way up to 100, okay? And in fact, most of the people are in between that 1 to 50 process. And you can notice here on my bar at least, you'll see that the XP scales quite hard. In fact, in those early 50 levels, the XP to level up is around 2 million, and getting from, as you can see, 94 to 95 is about 19 million, which is almost 10 times the amount of XP. And that means that it scales quite hard as you're approaching those higher levels, which means that, again, the amount of time that you need to spend reaching that max level is far, far greater than I initially expected. And as I've said in many previous videos, for those of you that are watching the channel for quite some time, the Diablo 4 kind of market seemed to approach casuals and try to give them an ARPG experience that you would like to enjoy, or that you can enjoy without putting tons of hours in. And what's interesting about it is, as someone who loves to grind out the games like myself, I think this game kind of mixes both kind of extremes of the audience in terms of people that want to grind a ton, but also potentially people that want to play casually. And I want to talk a little bit more about that as well. So the first thing that I've noticed is the storyline is absolutely amazing going through, and the amount of exploration you can do and amount of objectives that you can do throughout the game is extremely, extremely fun for casual players. You can get a lot of progression, you can get a lot of legendaries, you can get a lot of the ARPG experience just playing through up until World Tier 3. And as you approach World Tier 4 and it's starting to get your build flushed out, starting to get access to the Paragon system, you actually do and have the ability to kind of experience most, if not all, of the game at World Tier 3. So as a casual player of the game, you can easily acquire a full build, you can easily experience all the nightmare dungeons, you can easily experience the world bosses, everything that Diablo 4 has to offer, you could experience as early as level 50. And yet, the game has so much more to offer later on for people who want to push it even further. And that's where it gets a little bit more interesting, because I initially thought that at level 50, we're going to kind of beat the game in a sense, because it is so designed for casuals. But what I noticed is, as someone who enjoys pushing through the game, there's so much min-maxing to do. There's actually a lot of depth into the Paragon board. There's a ton of options you have for nightmare dungeons, which is the main end game of this game. And overall, those people that just want to look for a grind similar to the Greater Rift system in Diablo 3, or even like the hardcore grind of Diablo 2's leveling process, although I will admit that it's not nearly as much, I guess you'd say, in-depth in terms of leveling process as it was for Diablo 2, you still have a little bit of that feeling. And I think that this is actually a really, really well-designed system, giving casual players the ability to kind of grind out very briefly, finishing the story and getting access to your builds, and then also giving a pathway forward for those more hardcore grinders, but not making it too intense. I guess you could say it's not quite meant for like the absolute most hardcore grinders, but it is something that, you know, a lot of people can get a lot of value out of, including people like myself who have been playing for 70 to 80 potential hours at this point inside the game. Actually, I might even be close to 100 hours since the live game releases, okay? And one thing that I'll have to say more so than anything else is the Paragon board has actually been a super engaging process. In fact, I've spent hours and hours trying to kind of figure out what the best Paragon board is. And it's one thing that I have to critique about this is that it's a shame that newer players can't really engage with that. Because as I've said, almost everything in Diablo 4 you can engage with at level 50. And one thing that you can't really engage with is the Paragon board, because you could reach level 50, and unless you've maxed out your renown, which you most likely would not have at level 50, you might max out one area, you'll have 4 Paragon points. If you get to 60, right, you're gonna have potentially 2 maps complete, which is 8 Paragon points, plus 10 levels of Paragon points, which is 40, right? So you have 48. Well, if you look at this first node, which is the starting zone, you'll notice that I kind of have around 10, 20 nodes that I'll have to use to get to the first glyph and move my way towards. And by 40 points, you might have 2 boards, and that's it with 1 glyph, which means that you can't really engage with it. And actually, a lot of players probably won't be. But that could be potentially a positive in that it doesn't have to be super complicated for the casual players, but there might be some players that might want a little bit more involvement. So I'm not quite sure what to think about the Paragon board quite yet in terms of whether it's a good thing, how it's designed for the casuals, giving you a kind of simpler look at it because you only have access to maybe 1 to 2 boards with a couple of glyphs, versus when you get to the end game, I mean, you got so many options. Do you want to go for a legendary node? Is this 6th glyph worth it? Can you actually get the stats associated with some of these rare nodes? As you can see here, I don't even have the intelligence for some of the rare nodes on the final board, so it might not even be worth it, etc., etc. So lots of min-maxing there. The last thing that I kind of wanted to talk about is sort of my experience with the end game content of the game, which is, at the end of the day, Nightmare Dungeons. Now, I found this to be an actually extremely engaging experience because most people are barely involved with Nightmare Dungeons, if at all, at the current point, right? As we mentioned, about 50% of players aren't even at level 50 yet. And if that's the case, then you probably aren't even at World Tier 3, and that means you haven't even accessed Nightmare Dungeons. But what I've noticed is that they've actually designed the Nightmare Dungeons extremely well. Initially, when I was thinking about this game, I had not thought that Nightmare Dungeons would be an engaging process. I viewed these as essentially a glorified Diablo 3 Greater Rift system, which is fun as someone who's played a lot of Diablo 3, especially with the recent Season 28. But jumping into this game, I found that this has been a really, really fun process. For example, look at this one here, Pharaoh's Den Nightmare Sigil. Okay, first off, it's the dungeon. The dungeon has specific mob types. Depending on what class you are, the mob types matter a ton, right? So, for example, I really, really hate spiders that detonate and do poison damage. Poison's really, really powerful in this game, and if I'm in the middle of the enemies, I just get hit by poison damage, and there's nothing really I can do. It's kind of just a natural thing with the mob type. So, if that's in the dungeon, I don't want to do it. But Pharaoh's Den here gives me an indication of the monster type, right? But then there's also the dungeon affix, the bonus affix. This is actually a really, really important one as well, because crit strike chance is one of the most important things on my build. So looking for one of those is actually extremely valuable, but I can also go for more rewards, etc., things like that. But then you get to the affixes, and these really matter. Like, it's not something that, oh, I can just run in and do whatever dungeon I want. For example, here, one that I really hate is the Lightning Storm one. Lightning Storm's an absolute destroyer of the build here. Why? Because as the rogue, I'm jumping around, I'm moving to pack to pack to pack to kind of speed up my process and also reset my cooldowns. And if I have to teleport back or dash backwards to get into the lightning shield, it slows down my process significantly. I ignore all lightning storm affixes, or all Nightmare Sigil affixes that have lightning storm because it's just too hard, too annoying to deal with. Or for example here, there was another one that had 60% less damage from critical strike and poison sometimes. This is impossible for me to do at a reasonable pace compared to other Nightmare Dungeons. So I just completely abandoned this. So min-maxing your Nightmare Sigil is actually a really engaging process for me in the end game. And it's something that hopefully a lot of you have to look forward to going into the future. But I figure I'd just talk a little bit about kind of what the game has been like so far and kind of what I've enjoyed and how my perspective has changed a little bit in this video. Overall, the game has been quite solid, and my initial rating of the game was 8.5 out of 10. And honestly, I'm not changing that because I was worried about the end game because I thought it was going to be like D3 Greater Rifts. And although I do enjoy those, they do get stale. But I feel like the fact that it's harder and the fact that we have a lot of things to consider, it's been much more enjoyable. And on top of that, I've found that I enjoy the actual harder leveling process, and I feel like it's balanced in a way where both myself and more casual players can enjoy the game a lot. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. I figured I'd just drop my thoughts here about the game so far, and you'll have more videos to look forward to, talking about some tips and just more things about the game, builds, etc. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and I'll see you all for the next one.